Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to take a closer look at the overall image quality from the new premium line from Samyang / Rokinon. And in this case, it's the 85mm f1.2. Your initial response to my first look video this past week showed me that there is actually a tremendous amount of interest in this lens, along with some skepticism as to whether it can actually compete with a Zeiss type lens or a lens like the new Sigma 85mm f1.4 art. So today what we're going to do is we're going to take a close look at the overall image quality from the lens. I'm going to try to break down what I perceive as its strengths and weaknesses and give you some kind of real empirical evidence for you to judge that for yourself, along with some of my own thoughts from just shooting and real-world use. When you review a lot of lenses, you develop a bit of a sense for their personality and what their strengths are in actual use. And so I'll try to communicate a few of those to you as well in our wrap-up. But let's jump in together and let's take a look at some real-world images and see what we discover. So we're going to start by just looking at a test of sharpness here. So this is wide open f1.2. I want you to note that I have set a custom white balance for this, daylight temperature, fixed lights that are used on this, so 5000 Kelvin is what I've set things at. It becomes important in just a moment. So if we start by looking over on the left side, we see that even at f1.2, right out to the edge, sharpness is not too bad. Center sharpness is of course better, and if we look towards the center, we've already got a fairly crisp looking result here at a pixel level. Over on the right side, things remain true, and that overall, this really looks pretty good considering this is right out at the bottom edge of the frame at f1.2. Now you can see if we go down to f1.4 here, we'll shift them back and forth. Even by f1.4, you're seeing a difference in the amount of vignette that's there. I estimate vignette to be between 2 and 2.5 stops in the corner. And so, but it does start to clear up relatively fast, though not absolutely. So at f1.4, it's really not a huge difference compared to f1.2. You may have just a little bit of more of texture information, but overall it is a pretty similar result. Now moving up here, let's see, we're at f2 at this point. And so at f2, you're going to see that most of the vignette, I think for practical field purposes, the vignette is cleared up. And now we have, better sharpness across the frame, but frankly, I don't know that there is a huge difference between f1.2 and f2. I mean, it's all kind of within the same ballpark. Maybe there's a little bit different, but right from the beginning, contrast is good and sharpness is good, though not as exceptional as what we've seen from lenses like the 85mm art lens from Sigma. So here, let's just look a little bit further. We'll step this on down to f2.8. Now at f2.8, we're starting to see that sharpness hitting the corners a little bit more. In the center, of course, everything looks pretty much perfect at this point. And over here on the right side, that looks very, very good as well. Now we have the Tamron on the left and we have the Rokinon on the right. Now here's what I told you about the white balance. So this is a constant white balance. So you can see there's just a very different color rendering between the two lenses. Of the two, the Tamron is a little bit more accurate. However, I think that some people are really going to love the color rendering out of the Rokinon. Now a quirk here, both in the camera body, in Lightroom, pretty much every piece of software recognizes the new Rokinon 85mm f1.2 as being the Canon 85mm f1.2L Mark II. So anyway, just a little quirk to note there. So if we look at the center of the frame comparing side by side, the Tamron of course is very, very sharp. And if you take, put any stock in DxO Marks testing, they have the Tamron just a couple of ticks behind the new Sigma 85mm f1.4 art. And so the Tamron is very, very sharp. It's one of the sharpest lenses that they've tested. Over on this side, I would say, looking here, that maybe there is just a little bit better performance for the Tamron, just less of the line doubling. And so, it shows that the Tamron, of course, is very good from very early on. Now, just a quick comparison at f2.8, and so if we look on, of course, very easy to see which is which. On the left, this is the new Rokinon in the center here. Let's see, overall, I would say a pretty comparable result in terms of overall sharpness. And over on the side, if we look over here, again, I would say, it's pretty much an equal performance at f2.8. And so that means, the lens is very sharp. Now, it's not really that gets me excited about this lens. It's a very sharp lens, but the Sigma Art is sharper than it, but it's this that gets me excited. If you look at the quality of this bokeh in this test, it is just fantastic. So yeah, this is at f1.2. If we look here, pretty good sharpness and contrast overall, just a slight bit of haze, but where everything is perfectly in focus, focus is good, but this is where things are special. Look at that beautiful, beautiful bokeh circle right there. And what I really want you to note is in this transition, often you'll see a fairly strongly defined inner line. It is absolutely soft here. You can't hardly see that line at all. There's basically no busyness in the bokeh circle. Towards the edge, I see just a little bit more busyness, and in this case, where it's doubled up, I'm seeing a little bit of an inner line, but overall, that is a gorgeous, gorgeous performance there. Now, just to give you a sense of how the Sigma Art looked in a similar comparison. So if we look here towards the center, we're going to see that the Sigma, you can see that inner line a little bit more there, and also there's a good bit more of just kind of the general busyness. Now, that's not to say the Sigma gave a bad performance. This is not a bad performance, but you can just tell a difference in the quality of the bokeh rendering from the Rokinon. It is super soft, super special. So that's at f1.4. So let's just do a comparison. Now, obviously, the Sigma is a little bit short of 85 millimeters, but in this case, obviously, the perspective is not quite the same. In the case of the Rokinon, it's a little bit closer, and so it throws the circles. It's not apples to apples. But mostly, we're looking more at the quality of the bokeh here, and you can just see that that's just a much softer, smoother transition, and that really does play out in the real world. Now, there's one area where the Sigma has the advantage, and that is that if we look here at f2, it pretty much has perfect bokeh circles across the frame. You can just barely see the nonagonal shape starting to appear, but a very even, very nice circular result there. So if we look here at f2.8 for the Rokinon, we've got that kind of evenness around across the frame, but at the same time, there's a more nonagonal shape that's showing. It's worth taking a look here, and because while we are starting to just faintly see that inner line emerging, and of course a little bit more busyness within the bokeh circle overall, I mean, we're still getting a really, really fabulous result. And of course, as far as sharpness goes, that looks pretty fantastic right there. So just to give you an apples to apples comparison, here with the exact same framing is the Tamron. And so the Tamron is framing just a little bit tighter, and so I think it's just a little bit long of 85 millimeters because these were set up at the same place. But unlike the Sigma, when I put the Sigma and the Tamron, side by side with the exact same distance, there was a big difference in the framing, and there's not much of one here. So, looking here, we see that overall, there's nice sharpness on both of them here. Now, if we look at the quality of the bokeh here, the Tamron actually delivers a really, really nice, clean result as well. But you can definitely see more of that inner line here, and that even though this is stopped down, and you are starting to see a little bit of the shape of the aperture blades, if you look at this transition right here, it is still really, really incredibly smooth. And so that's really a plus for the Samyang or Rokinon lens. And I find that this plays out in the real world. Here is, using it in the studio, and just look how beautiful that fall off is. This is at f2, and if we look, there's great sharpness on the face. Look how much detail is rendered. This is on a 5D Mark IV. But then as we melt away from focus, it's just a really gorgeous result. And as I said, I think that in the studio, that color rendering is actually really, really nice. It's great for skin tones. Here's another glasses shot here, and so once again we see as we look here that there's just lots of great detail that has been rendered here. So a very, very nice portrait lens. Of course, the challenge, particularly in shooting here like a 9-year-old subject, was getting them to stay still long enough to manually focus. Here's another example from the portrait here. This is just out of camera here, and so you can see, lots of great sharpness, and even without any kind of processing, skin tones are being handled very, very nicely, and an overall light fall off is great. The vignette here has been added artificially. I did add that because at this point, this is stopped down to, let's take a quick look at f2.8, and at f2.8 the natural vignette is basically gone. So I add a little back end for the look of the portrait, but overall a really fantastic result. Here's at f1.2 just to show that if you've got a subject that's still, you can produce a really beautiful result, and for this kind of work, that's good sharpness there in the area of focus. This is on a 6D body where I have an EGS focus screen, so it's a little bit easier to just organically focus and shoot. And so not quite as much resolution and sharpness, but still a really beautiful global result. Here, not quite at minimum focus, but close to it. You can see that the lens still resolves very nicely, close to minimum focus, but you see what it's done with the background. This is a fairly busy background here, actually, and it just completely melts away. Gorgeous, gorgeous defocus area. Now, one defect, that you have to be careful about is that the lens is very flare prone. It's got tons of glass there in the front, and so if you put the sun into the frame, as I've done here, you most definitely get a loss of contrast, some veiling here, and there also is a ghosting pattern that's here. At wide apertures, it's fairly soft, and so it's still useful, and I find artistic value for this, and so, but just beware that that is there. This is just to kind of look, this is at f1.2. If we look here in terms of looking for chromatic aberrations, you can see a little bit here and there, but overall chromatic aberrations are not bad on this lens. They're controlled quite nicely, and I got a much worse result shooting this kind of thing with the Sigma 85 Art lens than what I did here with the Rokinon. Here, just f1.2 just goes to show, number one, our background has completely just vanished. And then, however, if we look at our subject here, lots of nice crisp detail, good contrast, and there's a little bit of green fringing in the out of focus area, but it's not bad. But overall, this is straight out of camera. That is a very soft, beautiful result. So as you can see, and on one hand, I wouldn't say that this new Rokinon SP Special Performance 85mm f1.2 is really quite as sharp as some of the newest 85mm lenses that we have seen. Of course, a lens like the Sigma 85mm f1.4 Art, I believe you're going to find that the Art series lens is sharper at all equivalent apertures. And even as we saw with the new Tamron 85mm f1.8 VC, that lens is probably sharper in terms of overall edge-to-edge performance at wide apertures. However, I think that the strength of the Rokinon Samyang lens has more to do with its overall rendering. I view it more as a sharper version of Canon's own 85L Mark II. The 85mm f1.2L, of course, it still has a fairly unique feat in that it's a full frame lens that has autofocus and a massive f1.2 aperture. So of course the Rokinon, it matches that massive aperture, And I think that also matches the overall rendering and perhaps even improves on the famous bokeh quality and subject isolation of the Canon lens. It does that by having less chromatic aberrations, and while a place like DxO, when they chart test, they may find that this lens has as much or may even chart as having more chromatic aberrations as what the Sigma 85 Art does. But in real-world usage, you'll find that when you're not shooting something flat like a chart test and shooting out in real-world lighting conditions, I found that the Art lens had a little bit more chromatic aberration than what shows up on something like a DxO report. And so I think that the opposite is going to be true with this lens. I find that in real-world use, that overall chromatic aberrations are quite well controlled, particularly for having such a massive amount of glass. And so I think that you can look at this lens as being a manual focus, kind of optically superior version of the Canon 85L Mark II with a lot of the similar strengths and weaknesses. And of course, the major drawback for this lens that means that while it undercuts the Sigma by a couple $100, there'll be far more people that buy the Sigma than buy this lens for the very simple and good reason that the Sigma has autofocus while this lens does not. And of course, manually focusing lenses, particularly those that have a very small depth of field and a very big maximum aperture, is certainly a challenge. And since this is right now only comes in a Canon EF mount, it means it deals with all the limitations that come with Canon bodies. And unfortunately, they aren't the best platform for manual focus. I've used it some on the 5D Mark IV because I prefer the overall image quality from the 5D Mark IV, but I've used it also quite a bit on this Canon 6D body because I've got the Canon 6D set up with the precision matte focus screen, which just makes the whole focus process much more organic and much more enjoyable for me. And so when you do use the lens to its strengths, it performs beautifully and really does great either out in the field or in the portrait studio. But of course you do have to master the technique of consistently focusing accurately with it, and that may be too great an obstacle to overcome for some users. I hope this has helped you out in getting a sense of the overall image quality from this lens, and I'll do my final wrap-up on the lens next week. That will come out along with my written review and a number more images that I'm going to be taking with it during that review period. You can look down below and find the ongoing image gallery, a link to access that, and of course some buying links if you would like to order, or in this case probably pre-order one of these for yourself. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.